Welcome, everyone. I'm Mike Mylrea, an AI technical fellow at Arctic Wolf, and it's an honor to moderate today's conversation from dugouts to data lakes. Today, we're exploring the intersection of sports analytics and cybersecurity, two arenas where AI and data strategies have become critical to success. As a result, we see that AI is everywhere, but very few organizations can answer when and where AI should be applied, when humans should be in the loop versus full automation, and how to best combine humans with machines or AI. To help answer those questions, I'm joined by two industry leaders who have each transformed their fields, one at the nexus of sports and data science, the other in cybersecurity. Some brief intros. We have Dan Schiappa, president of Arctic Wolf, my colleague who's leading the world's largest private cybersecurity company, one of them, and home to the world's largest commercial security operations center. And we have Ari Kaplan, chief evangelist at Databricks, and one of the real life inspirations behind our favorite movie, Moneyball. Let's jump on into it with Dan kicking things off. Dan, at Arctic Wolf, we analyze over 8 trillion security events weekly, a vast ocean of signals. Can you share how we're leveraging AI and this unique data set to compete and win against a complex and evolving cyber adversary?
Yeah, so I think what makes our situation unique is it's not just the amount of data, it's the breadth of the data as well. So we're collecting it from over 200 different data sources. And so you get a real kind of broad breadth and viewpoint across a variety of customers' ecosystems. And so for us, what that means is, we're able to kind of find what I call finding that needle in a pile of needles, right? In a world of AI, finding a needle in a haystack is pretty easy, but finding the needle that matters in a pile of other needles, that's the hard part. And so for us, it's using AI to go through all that data, filter out the noise, find the signal that matters, and then start to stitch that signal together across multiple signals to find the things that other people just don't normally find. So a typical software vendor is looking at one visibility point when we see all of them, and we can take this signal from an endpoint and take it to a firewall, take it to an identity gateway, take it to an email gateway, and you stitch those 4 things together and you go, aha, something here is afoot that each one of those vendors would have otherwise missed.
Ari, your work at the nexus of sports and data analytics has really reshaped how talent and performance are evaluated. What parallels do you see between player performance metrics and evaluating AI effectiveness in cyber or other critical sectors?
Yeah, so this is one reason I'm super excited to be here, since there are so many different parallels. And by the way, I love Arctic Wolf. I love telling the story. I do give that 8 trillion per week number, since it just blows my mind how massive that is. I tell people one-on-one and during keynotes, but anyway, similarities are multiple. You are in sports, you're trying to make short-term predictions, you're trying to make long-term predictions. You are trying to, like predictions, for example, here's a player today, how might they do next year or 5 years from now? So that's kind of like both the short and long term. You're seeing, how are things growing and changing? Speaking of which, the other parallel is the world is changing. An algorithm, like in cybersecurity or what you might be approaching, might be attuned to what's happening in real life today, but the market changes. AI is coming on. People, the threats are different. The people can mask their identities better. But the same thing like in sports. Major League Baseball, where I spent much of my career, just recently massively changed the rules, the pitch clock, the size of the base, number of pickoff throws. So that's what we call data drift. When the data changes, or even perhaps the behavior of what you're analyzing changes. So that's like one of the big parallels. But there are short-term risks in cybersecurity. Like that's why you need this real-time, as fast as you can response. And in baseball, and also I worked with Formula One, 300 sensors, 1,000 times a second. You need millisecond response. That's like the difference of coming in first and second sometimes is that minuscule short term. But then the longer term, you only have so many players to choose from, and they're kind of there for the year. What are the strengths, weaknesses, and habits of your opponent, and what's changed lately? It's probably the best parallel. What are the strengths, weaknesses, habits of the potential threats or risks, risk assessment? And it's all, the needle in the haystack. I use the terms causal data. What's the signal and the noise? And working for team has been a huge honor. But what's kind of funny is wherever you go out there, you go to your dentist, you walk down the street, you walk your dog with your neighbor, and they're all throwing out seemingly crazy ideas of how to rank your opponent. It could be signal, it could be noise, but it's really up to the teams with limited staff. You can only look at so many things from a human. That you have to pull that signal from all the noise and do the appropriate scenario planning.
And thank you, Ari. And Dan, for over 2 decades, you've been finding that needle in a haystack, improving signal to noise ratio. How do you see things changing with AI? Do you also see the competitors or adversaries evolving with AI, as Ari alluded to? And if so, how do we as an organization evolve to that adversary that's complex, nonlinear, and constantly evolving?
Yeah, I think that's always been the challenge in cybersecurity. As Ari mentioned, when you have data drift, data signals are changing. Well, they're purposely changing in the world of cybersecurity because you have an adversary who's trying to go unnoticed. And so they're purposely trying to evade whatever you're doing. And so we've always been in this kind of arms race with defensive and the offensive part of cybersecurity. And with AI, it's really kind of like a nuclear arms race, right? The potential impact could be even bigger, and the speed of which the technology moves is even faster. And so for us, we're absolutely seeing offensive AI being used in a variety of ways. The most obvious ones you hear about is the great, kind of phishing and vishing and all that stuff that's becoming more and more harder to discern. I mean, you watch these videos now of, Michael Jackson stealing somebody's chicken McNuggets and moonwalking out the front door. And I mean, it's so realistic, so it's so easy now to dupe people in that regard. But we're also seeing it for things like vulnerability scanning. We're seeing autonomous attacks. At least part of the attack is autonomous. I still think there's certainly humans involved in that, but we're not too far from the day when there'll be full autonomous attacks. And one of the things that we saw in cybersecurity that was a game changer is when the attackers went from doing the attack to providing technology to others to do the attack. So you got ransomware as a service, malware as a service, and you basically enabled malintended people who maybe weren't technically savvy enough to do it themselves to go do it themselves. Now, when you can start to license autonomous AI attacks, and you've just unloaded, negative kind of energy across the entire system. And so we have to continuously evolve ourselves and try and compete at the speed that our adversaries do. And I think, athletics and cybersecurity are similar, that you live in a world where you have adversaries, right? And sports, it's you have competitors that you compete with. And for us, we have literal adversaries. And the difference between first and second place in cybersecurity, there is no you gotta try and win, right? They use that line. Offensive teams, we write 100% of the times. Offensive just have to write once. So the stakes are pretty high.
Thank you, Dan. Ari, your work has really changed how data is applied to professional sports, how we compete against in the cyber world, what we call adversaries. You taught us that small insights can drive major gains. A lesson that was really reaffirmed when you helped the Cubs win their first World Series in over 100 years. How does your work at Databricks help organizations surface other subtle, high-impact indicators in their data, be it AI model behavior, be it anomalies from a cyber adversary? Jam on that for a little bit. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, first, Mike, glad you brought up the Cubs. I know you personally, and you're a big fan. But it was a big, honor to help make that happen for really the multiple generations of fans 108 years, same number of seams on the baseball, kind of a random fact, but it was beyond the epicness of it. It was like a processed building strategy. Where do we want to go? Where are the gaps that we have, and how do we build towards that? But yeah, to your point, with Databricks, I don't know how many listeners know about us. You should definitely check us out, but we're one of the fastest growing software companies of all time. Now, over 100 billion, market cap, the private market with over 4 billion in revenue, but focused on data and AI. And we came out, the title of this, Lake House is part of the title. That was a term Databricks came up with. It's a play on the word data warehouse and lake house, joining structured and unstructured data, which is totally apropos to this. So cybersecurity, you have IP addresses, but then you also have, some, lots of unstructured information as well. And in sports, you have structured information, like what are the mechanics of the swing, like each body part is a JSON file of three-dimensional points. But then unstructured data, you have video, and one of the threats are people cheating or people reading like their signals that coaches send to players, and it's basically an encrypted code. So video is one big thing. Scouting reports. How can you take what a human evaluated a player and find signal of what words they used and what combination could better predict? So that's where, like, one of the things, data science in general, and then I'll talk about Databricks, but in general, the more types of variables you have, the more complexity of the world you can encapsulate, then the better predictions and classifications you make. I know Dan touched up on that. It's not just the volume, but the variety. So the more types of data, so that structured, unstructured, real-time streaming, the more sources that you can get into one predictive model, that makes the model more intelligent. So the data lakehouse is just an industry term for a platform that eliminates these data silos. And now almost every company in the world has a lakehouse, whether it's us or one of our competitors. So now the topic is data intelligence platforms. So that is, how can you leverage AI to just get more intelligent insights? It's not just traditional data warehousing, SQL queries of what happened in the past. Now it's very complex LLMs, Gen AI, combined with traditional machine learning, combined with business intelligence and data warehousing. So all these different workloads. So having this unified platform, the more types of data you can pull in, the better the insight. So Texas Rangers, combining baseball, they're a Databricks customer I worked with. They won the World Series for the first time ever. So the first time in infinity. But they unified their data sources, made it simple. They democratized their data. So their general manager, who was a scout, their players who don't know how to write Python code, nor should they, can now just ask, have a conversation with their data. So that's where like the Databricks data intelligence platform helps drive that, with all the governance too. You don't want information, like HR is an example I take. I won't pick on you, Dan. I'll pick on you, Mike, since we're longtime friends. If I want to know what is your salary, and I don't work for the company, I shouldn't be having access to it. But if Dan wants to, president, he could have access to everything. But if somebody makes what's called a materialized view, you have access, but you make a new table and grant that data to the world, you want to avoid that. And Gen AI today is not necessarily secure enough. There aren't the best benchmarks or judges out there to evaluate the governance. So that's where the Databricks platform helps, especially, is unifying, but then also adding this governance layer to ensure that everything from the raw data to the tables to the SQL code, Python code, AI applications, and yes, now chatbots, dashboards, all have that same unified governance end to end. And yeah, just one more thought. I'm here at reInvent. Had a great conversation with teams augmenting their data through, like, for example, the Databricks marketplace. But really, whatever your platform, you're pulling in more sources of data and transforming and loading it. Like, one idea was like LinkedIn profiling. You could wait every quarter for the government jobs report and make your predictions, like finance predictions, or you could look directly at LinkedIn sources and see which companies are hiring right now, this very day. And that is a more recent and potentially more accurate jobs report than having to wait every quarter. So being able to get insights faster, which is what Arctic Wolf is amazing at. The Databricks platform helps do that. But in the end, you're getting more realistic, more applicable, more complex insights. And it's, again, easy to do. It's democratized. So non-technical people are now part of the whole process.
In baseball, Ari, there's a set of rules. The cyber adversaries we're defending against, those 8 trillion plus alerts per week, those adversaries don't have rules. They don't play by the rules. Dan, can you kind of extend what Ari was saying in terms of how we're applying AI to respond to that adversary that only needs to, we need to stop 8 trillion events a week. They only need to get one through for our mini customers. Can you respond to how we're applying AI to level that playing field, if you will?
Yeah, and so we're able to use AI to understand what data is actually valuable to us, and what data matters as it flows through the various kind of checkpoints within the system. And then over time, because we also have that human element, there's a very important factor here that we have a human element, right? And so AI will find things that are typically repetitive in the sense that adversaries, the good news, bad news is they still use a lot of the same techniques because they're still effective, unfortunately. So those are the things that are very easy to train AI models on. What we're able to do with part of the humans now is the human has that experience themselves across this vast amount of data as well. And they'll start pulling on threads and doing security investigation, and they will uncover something that no technology to date has uncovered. Well, guess what? We're training all our models against that human activity. And so as the humans start pulling on those threads and doing those investigations and leading to security outcomes, we're training our models on that. So the next time we go through, that human doesn't have to pull all those threads. We'll do that. Or at a minimum, we'll know what threads to pull for them. So all that information can be at the hands of the operator much faster than them kind of going through the investigation themselves. And so, and obviously with anything, we'll just get smarter and smarter and smarter over time as we collect all that signal, both the human-based signal and the AI signal.
Do you have any predictions, 5-10 years out, who is going to ultimately win with adversaries, again, being able to exploit the asymmetries of only getting one attack through, and we have to defend trillions of events a week? And if there's not a clear winner or loser, how do you, how can we uniquely apply our data set to, again, improve the odds of our customers winning and reducing cyber risk?
Yeah, so I think if you look back to the early days of machine learning in cybersecurity, I think that was really the time period where the offensive side got a little bit of a leg up. We're able to now predict things that were going to be malicious that didn't even exist yet based upon modeling against prior things. And that kind of turned the table a little bit. And you say, okay, Dan, well, if that's the case, why is ransomware still so effective? And if you look at the vast majority of ransomware attacks, it is because a company that, they had an employee as the weak link, or they didn't do something very basic in their security hygiene. It's still the very simple things that they exploit to get people across. Now, if you go into a world of a very sophisticated, focused, highly funded nation state-based security actor, you're in a different league. It's like playing single A ball and major league ball, right? You're playing ball, you're professional, you're still among the best, but there's a huge difference between A ball and Major League. And that's, part of the adversarial thing as well. And so for us to be able to block all of that, the initial focus is let's block all the things that are easy to block. And then now let's focus on the things that are hard to block. And let's make sure the things that are extremely hard to block, hitting, Garrett Cole's, two-seam fastball. Let's make sure that if we can't hit it, we're learning every time we swing and miss that we will eventually hit that pitch. And that's the beauty of AI is we can filter through kind of the standard stuff and get increasingly more challenging as the data and the models get better. And we're at a stage in the industry right now, we're getting a lot of the very challenging things. The Arctic Wolf, we're finding those multi-signal attacks that nobody else is finding. And we're going to continue to get better and better and better at that as we find more and more and more of it in the wild.
Yeah, and that's like super thoughts. And number one, just even me personally, I'm getting more and more frequent emails saying, your financial information may be at risk since there's an incident where, there's no technical problem, but somebody used AI to like fake a voice and get, convince somebody who worked at the company or at my kid's college, for an example, to give information. And that's getting harder and harder to do. And I just love the model of Arctic Wolf. In the past, many years ago, maybe companies can adequately handle their own security, like CISO, a little bit staff. But now that you have this purveyance around the world for all different companies, all different entities, you have this superset of data that any one individual company doesn't have. And that's where, you get the advantage, but customers can partake in that, and then similarly in sports, each team collects their own proprietary data, which is helpful, but then sometimes having an overarching, like called Hawkeye, where every team shares the same data of every single player movement, petabytes of data out there, everyone gains. But 100% the game, the old threats are still there, but now new threats that didn't exist are popping up. And then compute power, Mike, you brought up 5-10 years from now, that's the thing, quantum computing, or even one step before quantum, being able to do these massive calculations. If you're an individual, maybe you can go so much, but if you're another country, for example, or big entity putting significant money into compute power, companies need to start preparing now for the 1 to 5 to 10 years from now.
Yeah, I didn't even want to open the quantum Pandora's box here, because that's the doomsday, Terminator scenario, because you nailed it, Ari, in the sense that is going to be a step. To me, that's the step function change in what we're going to see in AI and in cyber in general. And the entities that are going to have that compute power to start are going to be the hyperscalers and nation states. And so, and what we know of today is there's a lot of nation states that actually front ransomware gangs, and they actually use the ransomware gangs to raise money for their cyber armies. And so if you are able to use nation state compute power against companies that don't have quantum power themselves in their defense mechanisms, it's going to be an unfair battle. And so that's, to me, where things get pretty scary as a cyber landscape. And that is probably certainly going to happen within the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. And one thing, and then I'll let Mike bring on the next topic, is like, we're hesitant now to talk quantum since it's like a bit awkward, but 100%, however you define it, massive more compute power is here and coming. But it reminds me of just a few years ago, it's 3 years plus a week since ChatGPT came out. Before that event, it was awkward to tell people AI, you should use AI to do this, that, or the other. It almost feels like quantum now. Everyone was shouting, we need good data, but now it's like the opposite, that everyone's racing with AI and we have to keep reminding people, you still need good data, and still traditional machine learning, which is like predictive analytics classification, is like 85% of AI, like that, that we see here at Databricks is still traditional, and the Gen AI is getting more and more used. But it's flipped. It's but it is something people seriously need to start thinking about planning now, since it meaning much faster compute is coming. That's a given.
Yeah, so I think just in response to that, I want to open this to both of you. Like as we marry, humans and machines, as we increase autonomy through agents and AI workflows, like is there a Pareto optimum? Is there this optimal mix of deep domain expertise and AI, and how do you evaluate it? How do you measure it? There's all of these these claims out there in the market about AI being the panacea, and we have to respond to that. How do we really baseline or objectively respond to that?
Yeah, I'll start. I always tell the analogy, like I am not going to be the person sitting on the plane when they announce that, congratulations, you're the first person to be a passenger on a pilotless airplane. I'm like, nope, not going to be the first one. I know it's coming, right? There's no doubt it's coming. I'm not going to be the first one. I'll let someone else take that. I'll still feel safer that, maybe a pilot's in the cockpit and they don't touch anything unless an emergency happens. But like, I want to be on that plane for a while until, I've seen that there's been thousands and thousands of hours flown without that. And like when I look at security, I think it's going to be very similar. There's going to be a lot of things that AI is going to be way better than a human at. They're going to be faster. It's more deterministic. They're going to be able to look across multiple data sets way faster than a human. But there's still that use a sports analogy. There's still that crusty old scout, right? Mm-hmm. Who, data, I don't need data. I've been looking at baseball players for 35 years. And I know there's that security operator's just been in the trenches. They've been in the battles. It doesn't matter what data says. They know through their experience that it's this over here. And we'll capture as much of that as we can into the knowledge graphs, into the various agents that will kind of replicate that expertise. But I think, when I tell our AI story to customers, there's always a visible sigh of relief when I tell them humans are still involved in the process. You're like, oh, thank God. Like I love this AI stuff, but I feel a lot better that your human expertise will be there. I think we'll be there for a while. And I think different industries, it'll be different. I think different aspects of cybersecurity will go aggressively towards AI alone. And I think other areas won't, like malware. As you mentioned, machine learning. Hey, we don't have humans very often kind of deciphering malware themselves, right? It's all AI. We've come a long way. When we call it traditional or legacy AI, that tells you how far we've come as an industry, that we're already referring to machine learning as legacy, but it's very effective. And so there's not a lot of human involvement in that anymore. And so over time, this is going to shift, and time is going to be heavily compressed, particularly as AI and compute power start to align.
And yeah, very well said. And just trying to keep bringing in baseball analogies, but humans, well, it all depends on what you're doing. In some ways, if it's a boring, repetitive, predictable, time-consuming task, then yes, that should be automated. Always, as I'm sure many of the listeners have been fascinated ever since I was a kid to try to automate something in life or in programming. How do you write a program to write a poem? How do you write a program to write a program? So always fascinated with that. But yeah, the baseball example is where the humans are in the loop. Is I had a junior machine learning data scientist who crunched numbers, made a recommendation for a player to be to be acquired, and basically the moral of the story is they did not include injury information in their data set, and the player was injured. They had Tommy John, would not most likely not pitched at all for the subsequent season. So yes, the model was correct for the data that was given, but if I didn't catch that and it got to the general manager, it would be seen, you should acquire this injured player. And he's like, oh, I didn't even realize that was I know there are injuries, but didn't put that into my bad. into my predictions. So that's just like where people who understand the business, depending on what you're doing, should be in the loop. Like another example, I am, through my role working with retail and consumer goods, and the algorithm would say the optimal strategy is to not sell your product in Walmart, since you make bigger profit margins in 7-Eleven and Walgreens, Sam's Club. But the reality is they have a 5-year, multi tens of millions of dollar contract. They can't legally even rip up and stop selling in Walmart. And number two is there is some benefit to get your brand out there and sell in volume. So that's where like humans or people that understand the business, I think will always be in the loop, but it just depends what you're looking to do. From information transformation, yes. For entering into the physical world with that airplane, yeah, I want it. Of course, I value my life and want to get it field tested. But I don't know. I went into my first Waymo, which did have significant testing, fully self-driving without any human even behind the wheel. I loved it.
Oh, it was fantastic. The Waymos are fantastic. I'll tell an interesting story. I tell us my first introduction to kind of the world of AI. I was back at one of my prior companies and was leading the display advertising business and in the search advertising business. And we had this site that you can compare multiple search engines back and forth. And so I just started. It was my first day. I'm in a room literally with over 100 PhD data scientists. They're throwing differential equation algorithms on the board that gave me PTSD from college. And I go in and I try something. I type in Sony iPod into both search engines. Our search engine came back and gave an ad for a Sony iPod on eBay and an ad for Sony iPod on Amazon. The competitors gave an ad for Sony Walkman on eBay and an Apple iPod on Amazon. And so I raised my hand. I said, hey, what part of the cotangent formula there doesn't know that there's no such thing as a Sony iPod? And someone goes, aha, I knew you were going to bring that up. The competitor, they manually enter that. I'm like, who cares? Like, if a human had to know there's no such thing right now as a Sony iPod, the customer's still getting a better experience than you trying to figure it out in math. Right. And so that's just another example of that human, being part of that process probably saved God knows how many computational efforts to try and figure out in math there's no such thing as a Sony iPod instead of a human entering something into a table.
Nice.
Yeah, I love that story, Dan, and it goes back to your airplane analogy also in terms of when to apply AI and machine learning to build trust. There's so many boundary conditions and outliers that when it becomes down to human life and safety or cybersecurity for that matter, we don't want to rely on the prediction power of a model for that outlier or anomaly all the time. So marrying humans and machines and AI in that context makes a lot of sense. Ari, have you ever had a similar experience in the sports arena where the data suggests one thing, but the coach maybe that's been there for 10 or 20, 30 years believes more in the art or intuition for the decision that needs to be made? And how did you respond?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I've been humbled, with such types of conversations. I've been honored to have a lot of personal mentors over the year. Jerry Krause, AKA Michael Jordan's boss, was one of my long-term mentors. My wife would tell me that I had more lunches and dinners with him than her over a given summer. And Fred Clare, the former GM of the Dodgers, when they won the World Series, I'm actually seeing him again next week. But they, give great life lessons of, the way people typically predict things in sports is looking at like motion capture of what happened in the past and apply it to the future. But, a lot of those scouts do have the ability to look at someone and say, at this point, I think they can improve. At this point, I think this is the ceiling, the best they have, or I think they've reached their peak and they're going to regress. And sometimes, it's impossible to get that PhD data science to do that like human behavioral science. So, Mike, I'll give you a Jake Arrieta story, pitcher who helped win the World Series. He, was good, and he went to another team, stopped using a pitch type. Like you have different pitch types for those who don't know: fastball, curveball, slider, changeup, splitter, and so on. And we thought that he went to another team, and that other team's human pitching coach told him, for whatever reason, don't throw that pitch anymore. And we thought, or the Cubs thought, if he reintroduces that pitch, we don't know why he stopped doing it. We just think it was the coach, that he would be more effective again. So that's kind of like where traditional data scientists fall short, is they just make traditional predictions and don't really do scenario planning. Like, what if we add this pitch? What might that do? What if this person can exhibit something new or learn something new? How does that affect things? So yeah, I don't know. There's just so many ways I've been humbled, but one positive way is Hunter Pence, baseball player, became the captain of the Giants. But there was a time with the Astros, he was a minor league player. He's super skinny, doesn't have much muscle, and half the scouts didn't think he would be competitive at the majors. Half of them did. The president, or the owner, Drayton, looked at me in the meeting and said, it's 50-50. You're the deciding vote, Ari. And right now, looking back, should have had an answer planned out. But my answer was, let me think about this. I want to do research. And they all kind of laughed. And I spent 24 hours doing research and looked at the numbers, which pointed I would filter the data only when he competed against major league quality opponents. How did he do? Which is something, just data scientists could do something like that, but it was my idea to do that. But then I also, having talked to him, I knew he was like a good listener. And I just had this thought, this use case that I don't think anyone had done at the time, but which is, I find once you reach the majors, either you adjust or your opponents adjust. It's a game of adjustment. And I saw that he would listen and he would make adjustments based on like constructive feedback. If his coach says, raise your elbow or lower your elbow, he'll try it out and listen and be cooperative. And if you're stubborn, if you're an elite player, maybe you can get away with it, but chances are you're not. And I was actually able to write a software program to see how does he adjust against the same pitcher in the same game or over time, and saw that he was in the top couple percent of all AAA players. So when I gave that information, I think people appreciated me coming back to them, since I could give them intelligent insights that he not just has the raw skills to hit major league quality talent, but he has the ability to adjust. And then every scout agreed, yes, he's a good listener. So they gave him the call up, and then the rest is history.
Thank you, Ari. Dan, thoughts from your lens at the helm of the world's largest, leading one of the world's largest security operations centers. Love to hear your thoughts on that, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, until sitting here with Ari, obviously I'm a former athlete myself. I never realized how much cybersecurity and athletics do align, because we're also all about adjusting, right? We're about, the same thing may not work anymore. And so you have to adjust. And how do you learn to adjust? And that's both a human issue, but it's also an AI issue. And that's where I do think AI gives us a huge advantage, right? We can learn even through the mistakes, through the things that we've missed, or through the things that somehow slipped through the cracks. Maybe we caught up the last second. How can we catch it earlier in the kill chain than we did this time? And you can learn through those mistakes by modeling things and building that feedback in. And so I think it's all about adjustment here. And I think the cybersecurity companies, not only that adjust better tactically, are successful, but you also have to adjust to the various trends. I always state that it's pretty easy to become a dinosaur in cybersecurity if you're just not literally on the bleeding edge 24/7, 365, because your adversary is. And so we're in a constant world of adjustment. And I do think that is where machine learning helped us back in the day. And I think that's where, more modern uses of AI are going to help us into the future. Is we now have the means to do that in a more autonomous way than we did before. As you know, as a kid growing up, you always learn from your mistakes. Hell, even as adults, we learn from our mistakes all the time. But sometimes they're painful. And so, with AI, hopefully we can learn things much faster so we don't make those mistakes. And we're able to adapt a lot quicker.
Thank you, Dan. Ari, some concluding thoughts? I know we're getting to time. And
well, the good concluding thought, following up on Daniel, is the tagline of Moneyball was "Adapt or Die," and that can't be more apropos to what we're talking about here. But no, this has been a great conversation. Hope people listening in found some inspiration. But yeah, we're at a critical time in the industry. Now's the best time to start preparing, and whether for your company or for your own personal career or growth, it's a super exciting time to be alive and be in the tech space.
Great. Thank you so much. Very excited to revisit and extend this conversation. Love what we're building together in the partnership, and very excited to see what's next. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.